Hi, welcome to Life and Hope, the first podcast from the Abortion Survivors Network. I'm Melissa Oden, the founder and CEO and the author of You Carried Me, a Daughter's Memoir, and Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence, which will be published by Focus on the Family in January of 2024. Life and Hope is the only podcast dedicated to the stories, the statistics, the behind the curtain, beyond the news look at abortion survivors and the impact that attempted abortions have. Thanks for joining us in today's episode. This month of September is full of groundbreaking videos, podcast episodes, and events. So to hear more about them, listen to the first episode of Life and Hope with Karen. But for today, I want to jump right on in and give you a chance to hear from somebody who is very close to Karen, her daughter, Lauren. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh boy, where do we start, right? There's so much we could talk about, but I think, we jump into the starting point, which is really based on something you said recently. When we were recording those videos that people are starting to see in September, you talked in the video about stories and darkness. And we know everybody has a story. Not everybody has a story like you do and I do, but everybody has a story. And you said something so powerful about, stories existing in darkness and the shame that is there. And then when it's brought to light. So that's where I want to just start. What's your story in terms of what's happened in your life that even brings you here today? And how have you seen darkness and light?
Well, I grew up in a very loving home, and I knew that I was born premature. But when I graduated from college and moved back home, my parents told me a part of my story that I didn't know anything about, a story that had been kept in the darkness in my family for about 21 years. So on June 20th of 2004, I was unpacking from a trip, and my mom came into my bedroom and asked if she could talk with me. And that day, she began to tell me that when she got pregnant with me and she went to tell my dad about the news, she decided that she wanted to have an abortion. And she went to several clinics trying to go through with her plan. And at the last clinic she went in, she was about 20 weeks pregnant, and she had the laminaria inserted into her cervix, and she was fully dilated and ready to give birth. And um, my dad actually called her in the middle of the night before she was to go in to have the rest of the procedure done. And she told my dad that if he would drive to Dallas from Little Rock, Arkansas, and meet her at the clinic the following morning, that she was 90% sure she wouldn't go through with the abortion procedure. And so my dad did. He drove to Dallas and met her at the clinic the following morning, and they went in, and my mom decided that she would not go through with the rest of the D&E abortion procedure. And so she was left there fully dilated and ready to give birth. And the abortionist didn't really give her a good prognosis for what her outcome would be and the outcome of that unborn child. But she went and moved in with a lady named Jana and her husband, Bill, from my dad's church. And they took care of her and made sure that she was able to be on bed rest when she needed to be. But on July 26th of 1982, my mom went into preterm labor. And at 8:23 that morning, I was born in caul, which means inside of the amniotic sac. And I was 26 weeks. I weighed 2 pounds, 6.5 ounces. And other than just being tiny, I didn't have a lot of side effects, really, or a lot of problems from my premature birth. I mean, of course, being that small, every day is a battle. To gain weight and to be able to breathe and all of those things. But my mom had planned to put me up for adoption. And then a nurse came in and asked if my mom wanted to see me. And when she went in and saw me in the NICU and saw that I could fit in the palm of her hand, she just burst into tears and knew that she had to keep me. And so she and my dad and Bill and Jana spent those next 53 days going back and forth to the NICU and really helping me fight for my life and stay alive and thrive. And my parents ended up getting married October 2nd, 1982. So they just celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. They're about to celebrate their 41st wedding anniversary. And so for me to find out that part of my story, coming from a home where I was loved by my parents, they really spent a lot of time telling me that I was their special baby and that I was a miracle. But I didn't know the full story until I was 21. And so that was obviously shocking. It was difficult to hear, but at the same time, it really showed me that God had a purpose and a plan for my life that was far greater than I could ever comprehend on my own. And I was really at a point in my life where I was actually struggling with what I was going to do next after I graduated from college. And God used my parents telling me my story to confirm that He was calling me to be a voice for the voiceless, and He was calling me into ministry. And so that set me on a path of doing full-time ministry over the past 19 years. And actually in July, I just stepped down from being in full-time ministry because I connected with Melissa and the Abortion Survivors Network. And now I know my purpose is to share my story and to be a voice for the voiceless and to represent abortion survivors who can't always come forward and talk freely because of different circumstances. How I'm able to do that is because God has really been at work in my mom's heart. And I'm so proud of her and for her courage. It's been a process, as you know, Melissa, of her coming to terms with going public with our story and being able to share it. But I know her courage is going to impact the lives of so many young women who have walked through similar situations. So when it comes to your question that you started out with, Melissa, about darkness and light, my story was in the darkness for 21 years. Obviously, there was a little glimpse of light when my mom shared that with me. It's been almost 20 years ago. And the process of healing has obviously brought that story even more fully into the light. And over the past couple of months, I think now that people know, it's bringing even more healing in my family and in our situation and in my mom's life as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's one of those things where nobody heals in the same way at the same time, right? Even survivor to survivor, right? All of us, like there's so much diversity in our experiences. And that's part of what we're trying to educate people about is, man, abortion survivor is, yes, a Melissa who survived an abortion that failed. An abortion survivor is also a Lauren who survived an abortion being stopped. I mean, the next step would have been, unfortunately, to tear you apart limb from limb. So we want to educate people about that. But in the midst of that, right, all of us, first of all, like have different trauma based on the type of procedure, right? I was poisoned and scalded. I mean, as many people know that. So my building blocks of trauma are different than your building blocks of trauma. And you were so much more premature than I was. So you probably had even greater care in the NICU, right? That gives you that little building block, even though I wasn't too far behind you at 31 weeks, but I was a whopping like 8 ounces bigger than you. We could have had the battle.
And then, I mean, that was still so small. They didn't have the technology then that we have now.
Absolutely. So every even survivor to survivor, right? We have all these different diversity in our experiences and kind of these building blocks that predispose us to trauma. But then you look at families and we don't heal at the same time in the same way. And I think that's part of what you have lived in the tension of. And tension is not always bad, right? Tension just is this circumstance that happens when you are on a healing journey and you feel like you're ready to talk about it or do something with it. And then you have other people involved in the story who are like, hey, I love you. Hey, I support you. I'm glad that you are being called to this place, but I'm not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, people often would say to me, if there are all these abortion survivors, Melissa, where are they? And you brought up an interesting point, which is, a lot of survivors, first of all, they probably don't know their story because it's in darkness. And if they do know their story, maybe they aren't given the space in their family because where people are all over the map with their healing, maybe they haven't been given that blessing or that freedom to share. Maybe they are so severely disabled that they can't speak about it. I mean, this is a reality. I just said this in a meeting yesterday. Those of us who know our story, communicate about it, are the lucky ones, right? To have survived an attempt to end our lives and have the health and the ability to share the story. And I know that's something that those of us who do, talk about this publicly, like, we don't take that for granted. That's part of why we speak, is on behalf of our survivor community who can't.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big responsibility. I mean, I feel a big weight of, being that voice. And I think that was something last July when we were at the retreat, in-person retreat in Austin. That became so clear to me, hearing 25 abortion survivor stories and meeting so many friends in this community for the very first time was amazing, first of all. So thank you, ASN, for providing that opportunity. But as I sat there and listened to everyone's stories, I mean, one, it's heartbreaking because there's so much trauma, like you said, that's involved in learning your story for the first time, and that those feelings of rejection and wondering if people love you and accept you for who you are and if you're wanted. I mean, those are all very real feelings that abortion survivors face. But when I sat and heard everyone's stories, I just knew in that moment that I was so blessed to be in a place where my parents were coming around to the idea of me being able to share. And it's been a process. It hasn't happened overnight. I mean, it's been 20 years since I found out my story, and I've waited and prayed for my mom to be ready for 20 years. Well, I guess for 19 of those 20 years, because about a year ago is when my mom gave me full permission to share my story. But her words to me were, you can share your story, but I probably will never share it publicly. And just look what God has done in the past year. She's out, she's out of the darkness. She's sharing, and ASN is providing her the opportunity to do that. And I just think that there's so much empowerment that comes with the truth, with being able to share the truth. But also there's a lot of people who aren't there yet and who aren't ready. And I know that I'm called to be a voice for them. But that is a little bit of a weighty, a weighty job because it's hard to represent all of those people well. There's so many amazing survivors and so many amazing people that may not have a voice for one reason or another. And I pray they, do get to a place where they're able to use their voice and tell their stories, but their stories are powerful and their lives matter. Yeah.
And we saw that even in August with the presidential debate, right? I mean, the media lit up around this survivor named Penny, which I know Penny very well. You've, I think, seen a little bit of Penny and her story probably. And, for people who aren't aware of what it's like to be in our shoes, Lauren, I don't know if you saw any of the news articles talking about this abortion survivor, right? They put it in quotes. I mean, put somebody in your shoes. What is it like when you see news coverage of abortion survivors, good or bad?
It's hard every time. It brings up a very real trauma and a very real title that none of us ever intended to wear. We're part of a club that's a small club of people that have this title of abortion survivor, and none of us wanted to be in that club. That wasn't part of our plan. So it is an honor, though. It is an honor to know that God chose us and God saved our lives, and that we have a responsibility now to carry that torch and to tell people that abortion survivors do exist. It's hard to read the articles and to read reporters' perspectives and to know that they have no idea what they're talking about. They have no idea that abortion survivors actually really do exist, and they're actually putting misinformation out there when they write these articles and say abortion survivor in quotes, or you just want to scream from the rooftops. You have no idea what you're talking about, because abortion survivors do exist, and we are very real, and our stories are very personal, and we're very impacted by the negativity and the comments and the hate that goes swirling around after the media puts misinformation out there. And so I think, I would urge the press and the media to really dig into the truth and to share these stories, because stories are powerful and people need to understand that we are real and that we do exist, and that our stories need to be told. And we're a very underrepresented group of people right now in this whole abortion debate. We're very underrepresented. And
which is
people need
one of the reasons why we're even doing the awareness month, is because, right, we were looking at it going, people just don't know. They don't even know what they don't know. And so, that's a part that excites me, is I hope the media pay attention to the videos, these podcast interviews, to our data, to, the history of abortion survivors webinar that we're putting out. We did, in all honesty, we did get some good traction based around that. The media did reach out and talk to the team at the Abortion Survivors Network. But, it's always interesting because they don't share our statistics. They don't quote the CDC data that talks about abortion survivors and failed abortions. They don't include the story of any survivors whose stories are documented, right? Verified, whatever it is. It is unfortunately kind of this same set of circumstances we've seen for decades. So yeah, it is, it's one of those things where I think the more the media sees and hears from survivors, like when we're launching the state advocates, that's what I hope, is that the media can look and see that you're right there in their community and say, okay, man, that's somebody who I need to have a conversation with. As a journalist, I'm sure that's important to you. Like, you would have known, right? Like, I need to cover this story well.
Yes, absolutely. There are 3 sides to every story, not just 2. And we're the third side. And that's what's so funny to me is I do have a degree in broadcast journalism. And so watching how this topic of abortion is covered in the media is difficult, because it's not unbiased. It's very one-sided. And, going back to my journalism roots, I'm going, oh my goodness, you are not sharing the whole story, and this is not unbiased. And there are 3 sides. And so those stories do need to be shared. And, it's funny to be sitting on the other side of it now. I never thought I would be sitting here sharing my story. I thought I was going to be sharing everyone else's stories with my broadcasting degree. But it's an important story that needs to be told, and people do need to hear the truth.
Mm-hmm. When you think back to first being told your story, 20 years ago, I mean, it's funny how time flies, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is crazy to think about that. What was it like when your mom told you? Because you and I have a lot of similarities in many different ways, but one of them is kind of that, knowing part of the story. So I knew I was premature, knew that I had a lot of health issues. I'm an adoptee as opposed to being raised in biological family like you. But I grew up thinking, I know a lot of people that are like me, right? I know lots of lots of preemies. I knew lots of people who were adopted. And so then to find out my story at 14 was incredibly traumatic, which is part of the reason why we know that serving families well is part of our mission here at ASN, is to improve the outcome for survivors of any age and their moms and their families. But, when you think back to that 20 years, so you found out your story because mom really felt like this urge that she was supposed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And you spoke about it for the first time at an event.
Yes. So I had just graduated from college with that broadcasting degree that we were talking about, and moved back in with my parents because my senior year of college, I just really felt God redirecting me, showing me that even though I had put all my stakes into this one plan that I had of being a television news reporter, that God was calling me into something different. And I didn't really know what at the time. And I moved home, and actually my mom and I remember some pretty intense conversations in my parents' kitchen where my mom was telling me, I just don't understand. For 7 years, I mean, even as a high school student, I was really involved in wanting to be in broadcasting. I had gone and shadowed at CNN in Atlanta. I had been in this broadcasting class and gone to all these workshops at the University of Georgia. And so it was like, it just felt natural to go to college at the University of Georgia, get a broadcasting degree, did lots of internships and all of that stuff. And so my parents were looking at it as, oh, this is God's plan for Lauren's life. We've always known that God had a plan for her life. Maybe she's going to make a difference in the news industry. Maybe this is her purpose. But in my mind, God had told me something different. And so I remember my mom, being really frustrated with me about it. And I didn't quite understand why. I looked at my mom one day and I said, Mom, you and Dad have always raised me to do what God is calling me to do. And I'm doing what God's calling me to do. And now you're mad at me about it. I feel like you're mad at me about it. And my mom really didn't have much to say in response to that. But she just kept questioning my decision to move back home. She felt like I was taking the easy way out, that I got scared or cold feet about moving to a small market, somewhere and being away from home. And that wasn't the case at all. But I was involved with this team of people in our county who were putting on a summer youth event for all the student ministries in the county. And the week before my mom told me my story, the person who organized the event actually came to me and said, I feel like you need to share your story at next week's event. And I was like, what story? It's not, I don't really have this like Saul on the road to Damascus, like earth-shattering testimony. I have a pretty boring story. What are you asking me to share, And he kind of like, power in your story, you're called to share it. Just pray about it. And I was like, okay, I'll pray about it. But I really had no intention of getting up there in front of 1,000 teenagers and sharing my story that weekend. And a few days later is the day that my mom came into my room and told me that she was going back to school at the time. She had to drop out of college when I was born. And, I had to eat every hour, basically around the clock. And so there were a lot of things with having a premature baby. She couldn't do school and raise me. So when she decided to keep me, that affected everything. And she had never gone back to college. But once I went to college, then she went back to school. And so she was sitting there studying at the University of West Georgia. And she tells the story now that there were very few times in her life that she knew God was speaking directly to her. This was one of those times where it just felt like God had just come down from heaven and, laid it on her that she needed to tell me my story. And so she had no idea why. I didn't tell her about the conversation about sharing my story in front of this group of students. But when she told me my story, just how God had orchestrated all the pieces, I went, okay, God, like, this is crazy. Really? I find out right now, and I've just been asked to share my story. So, I really couldn't even process what was happening fast enough. I hadn't even really come to terms with everything that had happened. But that following week, I didn't tell them that I had found out, all this new information about my story. But the same man came back up to me and said, "All right, are you ready? Here's the microphone. Go share." And I was like, "Oh my word." Like, I had no preparation, he just was like, "Go do it," and he didn't know. He had no idea what God was telling him that I was going to share. But that was the first time I shared it. And my youngest sister was actually in the room. She was 16 at the time, and she had not heard my story yet. And so that was the first time that she had heard it. And so
what
that
was
was a
the
pretty
response to that?
She was in tears, of course. I remember walking off the stage, and she was on the far side of the room, on the opposite side from me. And she came running around the back of the room and came over to me and, just engulfed me in this huge hug and was like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea. I had no idea." And she knew my parents and I had been having some conversations, but she hadn't been home. She was busy with, her summer and her friends and her plans. And so my parents hadn't had a chance to tell her yet. And so that was the first time she found out. So then, of course, that led to more conversations, but she knew something was going on, but she found out really quickly and in front of a really big group of people.
Also relatable as well, right? Like, if there is no roadmap for how to navigate this, right? We're trying to like help people decipher the roadmap a little bit of like, hey, it's important to be proactive and talk about abortion in your family, and then talk about abortion survivors as it's age appropriate, and then ultimately tell your child in a healthy way when you feel like they're best prepared. But yeah, it tends to be like splatter, 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 right? Everybody finds out in a different way and at a different time. And 9 times out of 10, it is sort of messy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great example as well of how like families keep secrets, right? Like certain people know one thing and then somebody knows another thing. And, the question is whether anybody ever matches those pieces up to align the story. And, I'm wondering, when you look back on finding out your story then, I mean, and I know you well enough to know that you look upon that and know that your mom felt called to share with you when she did. And obviously that was not a coincidence that you were being asked to talk about it when you did. But when you look back on it, like, what was the journey like for you then after that? I mean, did you ever think about it? You obviously, ended up getting involved in ministry, and that's sort of where you knew that you were called, and then you got married and started a family. I mean, did you ever think about that part of you, or it was just kind of out there? You guys didn't talk about it in your family?
I thought about it constantly. I went into student ministry in my first 10 years of ministry. And so, I was constantly talking to students about the difference in how God sees us versus how the world sees us. And of course, the topic of abortion came up a lot when I was, spending time with teenagers, because it's something that's all over the place, and in their faces constantly. And so I was able to share my story with them in smaller settings. But I knew that it was really hard for my mom, for me to continue to share it and continue to put it out there. When I would talk to her about it, I just could see kind of her defenses go up. I mean, it was like she thought, I'm pretty sure she thought that once she told me my story, she was getting it out there. She was clearing the air, and we would move forward. And
right,
that would be
it. Like, we're done, right? We're done with that. We did it. We talked about it. Moving on means not talking about it, right? Not doing anything with it.
Right. And she describes, and she may have said this to you, when she talked to you, but she describes her experience as, I put, after I had this baby, I put everything into a box and I put it up on the shelf, and I didn't take it down for 21 years. And then when I told Lauren everything, then it was like, slowly I started having to take things out of the box and really deal with them. But even after she told me my story, she didn't really want to deal with everything that led up to that point. And so I could tell when I talked with her about it that it was hard. And so I actually tended to talk more with my dad about everything. And he, I remember being newlyweds, and my parents came over one night, and my dad and I were sitting in our backyard around the fire pit talking. And I was telling my dad that night, Dad, I don't think God gave me this story to just keep it on the shelf. Like, my story is so powerful, and it's just a perfect illustration of the fact that no life is an accident. Every life that God creates is miraculous. And I don't feel called to just stuff it down or put it on a shelf. I do feel called that He's calling me to share it, but I'm just not sure what to do from here. I'm not sure how to navigate that. And then we went on and we had kids, and oh my goodness, my pregnancy with my oldest, I mean, it was like everything just clicked into place. Like, I started feeling like every ultrasound I would go to, I knew that my mom had an ultrasound at 13 weeks and 15 weeks and 20 weeks. And when we were pregnant with my oldest, when I had to have quite a few ultrasounds, and they were, watching him for some different things. And every ultrasound I would go to, I was just amazed at, how intricate God had knit him together already. You could see his little nose and, his personality kind of even in the womb. And I, at that point, just started feeling much more compelled that, like, people don't think about this. These women who are having abortions, they don't think about that this is a real life inside of them. The world is telling men and women lies about the fact that babies can't feel pain, and babies are just a clump of cells, and all of these things. I'm like, oh my gosh, these are such lies that the world is telling us. And so going through that experience, I started to have a lot of compassion for my mom and for other women who were in situations like my mom. And I just think the whole process, the whole journey up until this point, God has been gracious to kind of give me little glimpses into the other side. Being a mom myself now, the other side of what it was like for my mom. I wasn't 19 and, a college student when I had my first son. And so we had very different experiences, but I found myself thinking a lot about what my mom's experience must have been like, about my dad, and how he had to step up in a big way as a husband and a father really quickly. So just really putting all those pieces together, I got to a point where I was ready to start sharing. And of course, finding out about Abortion Survivors Network helped me along the way. It kind of gave me a boost that I needed to come forward and to really want to go through healing curriculum and speakers training and to share.
So how did you find us? I mean, I know you and I have probably talked about this over the years, but it's been a few years, more than a few years. So, I mean, people often ask that, like, how did you ever find out that there are other people like you in a culture that has tried to bury this under the rug?
Well, I will say that I did know about one abortion survivor before I met you, Melissa, and it was Gianna Jessen. And I love how God did this, because when I was in high school, I went to a youth camp, and Gianna was one of the speakers at the camp. And of course, at the time, I don't remember many speakers at all from my high school youth camp days, but Gianna stands out to me because she had a story that was so unlike anything I had ever heard before in my life. And then she sang at that camp, and that was so powerful to hear her sing after, hearing her story. And excuse me. So I knew about an abortion survivor before I knew that I was one. And actually, when I found out my story, I wasn't even sure if I counted. I was like, I wasn't like Gianna and Melissa, I wasn't born alive during a procedure. Now, chances are good that the procedure caused me to be born very early. But I didn't have the same story as the two of you. And so I wondered if I even fit into that category, But the way I found out about Abortion Survivors Network was that I was on social media one day, and there was an article that one of my friends posted. It was January of 2020, I believe.
Yes, I can probably guess what some of that media was.
Yeah, it was in the middle of a huge media frenzy at that point in time. And so I was reading an article. I clicked on an article. I was reading it, and I saw a quote from you, Melissa. Melissa Oden, founder of Abortion Survivors Network, says, I don't remember what the quote was exactly, And I went, wait, what? It kind of stopped me dead in my tracks. Because one, I didn't know that there were other abortion survivors. And two, I didn't have any idea about Abortion Survivors Network. So I remember immediately clicking on the link, going to the website. I read the entire thing. And then I started to ask myself the question, do I fit into this group of people? Like, I'm not really sure that I'm an actual abortion survivor. So I immediately fired an email to you and just said, hey, this is a brief version of my story. And I'm not sure that I fit into this label of abortion survivor, but I do know that I feel called to share my story. And you, of course, were so gracious and emailed me back right away and said, oh my goodness, you survived an abortion attempt. That isn't the definition of an abortion survivor. And I would love to connect with you. So I sat back for a while, though. I mean, I didn't want to share my story publicly with any organization that I wasn't sure I understood their goal and their purpose. And so I sat back for a while and watched everything that was going on and got to know you and some of the other people in ASN, and even did that virtual retreat in 2021. And that was really the first point that I really started. I mean, that was over a year after I met you. And that was really the first point that I was kind of like, okay, I can get on board with what this organization is doing and standing for. But of course, I had 3 small kids and I was working full time. And so it took a while. It was a process for me to get to the point where I was ready. And of course, it also, I had to wait for my mom to be ready. And I remember you even asking me about your book and, and that was kind of the catalyst for having conversations again with my mom about everything. Because up until this point, I hadn't gone back to my mom and talked to her much about sharing my story publicly. But when you asked if I would be a part of your book, I was like, oh, I don't know if my mom's ready for this. I haven't really talked to her much about it. I've talked to my dad a lot, but my mom doesn't know, that I've been having a lot of these conversations. And I just remember her response when I first asked her. She said, well, what do you want me to share? That I tried to kill my baby? Her response was just I was kind of shocked by her, her bluntness, but she's blunt anyway. But I was like, oh man, Mom, no, when people hear your story, that is not the first thing they think. That is not what they hear. That is not the truth, but it's a lie that she had, let fester, and that produced a lot of guilt and a lot of shame as far as, telling other people and letting them find out about this past, quote unquote, that nobody knew about her.
That's such a great point. I mentioned that in a meeting the other day as well, of, the fear that our mothers have. Any woman who has had an abortion that they stopped or they reversed or that failed, as much as there is joy in that, I mean, first of all, there's all the crisis, right? The circumstances that led to the abortion in the first place that typically aren't resolved quickly. And then you have typically the shock and the trauma of going through an abortion. And then the shock of determining that, okay, it failed, or like the grappling with, oh my gosh, I regret this. I want to stop it. I want to reverse it. So there's the crisis in that. And then the mother lives with that dual mix of, the joy and the love that they have for their child that you witnessed growing up, commingled with the shame and the guilt and the fear that anybody will ever find out their story. And especially for our moms, if we share our story publicly, I have heard so many times women say that they are scared that people will hate them for what they did and they love us, right? But they hate our moms. And I know you are the same way I am, which is like, I am the first one to stand up and go, don't you dare. Don't you dare disrespect my biological mother. Her experience is valid. Like, it is a story of far too many women, right? No matter what the circumstances were that led. I mean, my birth mom was forced. Your mom was going off the playbook of the culture at the time, right? And the fear inside of her head, which was saying, I'm never going to be able to accomplish all those things that I have planned out for myself, right? But she also made it clear, like, she didn't know anything about human development. Not a darn thing. In every clinic she went to, nobody was telling her that.
Right.
So she was very uneducated about it.
And she had parents and my dad's parents who wanted her to have an abortion. So, a lot of times we don't realize the pressure of that decision for a teenage girl or a young woman whose family or boyfriend or, husband is coercing them or encouraging them that this is the right choice. Because, of course, my dad wasn't in that same category, but the most important people in my mom's life at that point in time were telling her that that's what she needed to do. And I don't know if she shared this with you as well, but she had watched her sister just a few months before go through the same thing. And so she knew what her family's response was going to be. Her dad actually told her sister that if she was going to keep the baby or have the baby, then she needed to leave his house. And my aunt chose to keep the baby and she left. And so my mom had seen that too. It wasn't just my mom. She was basing her decision on a lot of different circumstances in her family. And that plays a huge role.
Oh yeah, that just gives me chills. I didn't know that part. I mean, and that makes absolute sense, right? Why your mom had so many fears and anxieties, and they were founded in reality. She watched her own sister not have anywhere to be completely unsupported because she had her baby. I mean, that's a very overt message to a woman. Wow. Man, that's a lesson right there. I mean, and okay, and when I think about this, and obviously I've talked to your mom about it and I've talked to Jana about it, but now that helps me understand just how meaningful it was for your mom to have a place to live.
To have Jana and Bill. Absolutely. They were the only people that she felt supported by. And even my dad, to some extent, their relationship was a little bit tumultuous while my mom was going from clinic to clinic, because my dad was so vehemently against my mom's decision. And then I think about my dad's side of the story and think, for him to stand up for that in spite of what everybody else was telling them is amazing in and of itself too. That's powerful as well. But they'll be the first to tell you that, their relationship was rocky, when my mom was going to all the clinics, and they didn't have the same view about what should happen. And then even Jana has shared with me that, when my mom moved in with Bill and Jana, my parents were on very different pages about what should happen next. It was like my mom knew she was going to keep me, but I mean, she was going to go through with a pregnancy, but she didn't have a plan to keep me and raise me. Her plan was to put me up for adoption. And my dad wanted my mom to keep me, but at the time he couldn't fathom getting married to her at that point. I mean, that was like unfathomable to him, to have a brand new baby and to get married and to make that commitment at that point in time. And so Jana and Bill too, where they were so instrumental in helping bring my parents together and helping them, to pray through that decision and to decide what was best. And my mom had the support that she needed for the very first time. And that just is so powerful to me. And I love sharing that with people, because I think so many people think that it's the government's job to legislate.
And care for people.
Support for women in these situations. And I feel stronger than ever that it's the church's job, that, that it's time for the church and the community to step up and to help women who find themselves in these very difficult situations, and to be like Bill and Jana were to my parents. the whole trajectory of my life and my parents' lives were changed because of Bill and Jana and because of their willingness to say yes to God. And I mean, they had never even met my mom whenever they gave my dad their credit card and told him to go to Dallas and bring her back. And the power in their story of saying yes and being willing to be obedient and to do something for someone else is so powerful. I mean, it's life-changing. It changed my life.
You know, I feel like in today's world, if this was, I mean, and it still happens, right? I mean, yeah, babies are surviving abortions, women are facing, right, crisis pregnancies, women are facing failed and stopped and reversed abortions. But thinking about Janet and Bill, I think even though our society loves a good story, right, of like the good Samaritan who, right, did this and that, I think there are a lot of people who would look at Jana and Bill and be like, you're crazy. You don't even know this woman, right? How long have you even known Bill? And you gave him your credit card. Like, right? I mean, it's this like bold love, this like, I'm going to put myself out there and have no idea what's going to happen, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And her mom, I mean, Jana talks about how her mom was so against them doing this. And they had young children. So, I mean, they had toddlers at the time. And so she was sacrificing a lot. Bill was new in the business world and he was traveling a lot. And so really a lot of the burden was on Jana to not only take care of her children, but also she was taking care of me too. She was fighting for my life. And she was caring for my parents, my mom and my dad separately and together, and because she loved them and she cared about them. And the sacrifice that she made during that time is incredible. I can't even imagine. She talks about how tired she was, you know, because she would be with her kids all day. And then at night after they were in bed, then she's up talking to my mom and my dad about what to do for days on end and weeks on end, you know, and
right, the physical and the emotional toll of that. And I mean, isn't that such a contrast of where Jana was at in terms of being able to make a big sacrifice and where your mom was at because of her family upbringing and what she wasn't provided and all that she had gone through, right? She was not at a place where she felt like she could sacrifice the life that she had planned out for herself.
Absolutely.
I mean, what would you say to families with like a similar background to your mom's, right? Where things are messy, difficult, right? There's health issues, there's, right? Then that leads to financial impact. It shapes so much of how the family functions. And I think even the messages that the family then sends to their children, right? Of like, here's how you're going to live your life, right? Here's what we want for you. I mean, what would you say to a family walking out similar circumstances to your mom's?
I think my mom felt an incredible amount of pressure given her family situation to achieve, you know, to be the first one to go to college and to graduate and to get a degree and to, quote, make a better life for herself. You know, I think there was a lot of pressure. And in our society today, there's a lot of pressure, you know, that our definition of success is very much wrapped up in our job, our financial standing, you know, where we stand in relation to the rest of society. And our worth and our value is found in so much more than that. And the foundational value that we have is life. It's not just guaranteed by our Constitution, but it was created by God in the first place. And we wouldn't be here without that, without our life, you know? And so it's like to put so much pressure on our children. You know, I look at it now I have a middle school boy and I have 3 boys. One's in middle school, one's in 4th grade, one's in kindergarten. All my boys are in school. And the pressure that they face every single day, the last thing I want to do is add more pressure to what they're going through. I want to actually be able to take that burden off of them and to free them up to say, listen, no matter what choices you make, no matter what path you feel that you need to walk, God is with you wherever you go. And he has a purpose and he has a plan for your life. And the last thing I want to do is put more pressure on them to perform or to achieve. I want to love them where they are. And I want to show a sacrificial, unconditional love and forgiveness. And I think for a family, I mean, it's hard, right? Like every family has their challenges. And for a family like my mom's growing up, there wasn't a lot of love and care because of the circumstances that she was walking through. Her mom had been in a tragic accident and had lost her memory, and there was a lot of trauma there. And her dad was doing the best that he could and with the best that he had, and a lot of us don't have the fortune of having two loving parents. There's a lot of things that we've overcome to get to where we are. And my mom is a perfect example of that. But we need people, we need a community, we need those who are willing to fight for us and to see the best in us and to love and support us no matter what we're walking through. And that's really where I feel, as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, as someone who has spent my adult life working in the church, the church should be the first place that people run to. Christians should be the first people to extend love and forgiveness to those who maybe have made a mistake or a poor choice. And unfortunately, in our culture, a lot of times we see just the opposite. We see or hear or feel condemnation for our decisions. And that's not the Jesus that I know. The Jesus that I know is a Jesus of love and compassion and not of condemnation. And so I just feel that that's what Bill and Janice showed my mom. They didn't condemn her choices. They loved her despite her choices and despite her upbringing and despite her circumstances. For the first time, she experienced unconditional love, and that changed her life. And it changed mine too in the process.
Yeah, there's something so beautiful about like being truly seen and loved, right? Whether you're in your mom's shoes, whether it's a woman right now who is maybe facing a crisis pregnancy, or, a woman or a man who experienced an abortion that was successful, right? Or even a survivor, we all operate from this place of wanting to be loved. That's how we're hardwired. But we're hardwired to want to be loved in the midst of our circumstances and exactly who we are, not the version that somebody wants us to be. So your mom has so much in common with all of us as survivors, right? And men and women who have experienced an abortion that was even successful tend to have a lot of similarities to those of us survivors as well. Like, this is not an either or situation, support them or support us. This is a love all of us, right? We've all been impacted by this. That's beautiful. I know you have a lot coming up. So I want to close today by asking you those big questions of like, what's next for you? You left ministry, you're starting to speak. You do lots of awareness in your state of Georgia, and we're launching our advocates very soon. And I mean, spoiler alert, we have a Georgia Advocates. People can figure that out pretty quickly. But yeah, tell us where people can find you on social media. Like, what events do you have coming up? How can people find out about your events?
So I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram. And so if you go to Instagram, my handle is Lauren Eden _ pro-life speaker. And then Facebook, it's Lauren Eden, abortion survivor, pro-life speaker, advocate for life. And as far as events go, in September, I'm going to be at First Baptist Church in Sonoy, which is 5 minutes from my house. It's kind of cool. That makes it super easy, but I'm doing their women's conference on identity in Christ, and I'm going to share my story there. And so I'm excited about that. And then on September the 12th, which is a Tuesday, I'll be on the north side of Atlanta at First Baptist Church of Woodstock. And this is the Marietta 40 Days for Life and Life Initiatives and Values kickoff for the fall. And I know, Melissa, you know Suzanne, and Suzanne and Rachel Guy. They're just amazing pro-life heroes in Georgia. And shout out to them because they are so busy in our state. A mother-daughter team that's just killing it in the pro-life movement. And what they do in Marietta outside of the Planned Parenthood clinic. I mean, she's been texting me this week about moms who've chosen life because they've been standing there and they've been praying outside of that clinic and they've been offering resources. And so it takes all of us. We all have a place in the pro-life movement. There's a place for us. And they're just a powerful example up to women who are everywhere. I see them everywhere.
Yeah.
But they're doing an amazing job and using their story for the good. So those are just a couple of things coming up, but a lot more to come over the fall. So that'll be fun.
Absolutely. And as we launch advocates, if anybody's interested in seeing who the advocates are that are being named, what states they're in, and click through to events, we'll be putting those on the Abortion Survivors Network website. So abortionsurvivors.org. Any final comments, thoughts before we close, Lauren?
Just thank you, Melissa. I'm just so grateful for you and your leadership at Abortion Survivors Network, and the training and the equipping that you do and the way that you lead is so powerful and so appreciated. And I know that you take a lot of heat. I mean, you are the shield that deflects a lot of the heat for all of us. But what you do makes it possible for all of us to share our stories in a safe and supported way. And that's so powerful. And so just thank you for what you do. And I want people to know that, you know, every life is a miracle. And so you're not here by chance. And if you've made a decision that maybe you regret or you're ashamed of, like my mom, know that you're forgiven. God's already forgiven you. And there's power in your story as well. And you have the ability to heal. And ASN would love to come alongside of you in that, but also to share your story to help others like my mom is doing now. And that's powerful.
Thank you for that. This has been another great episode. So, I mean, we're setting the bar high, starting these new podcast episodes. So I just want to thank your mom again, Kieran. I know you'll end up watching this. So thank you, Kieran. And thank you to Jana. You know, thank you to your dad for everything that he has done and he continues to do. And thank you for being willing to put yourself out there, not just in sharing your story, but being patient for your mom, loving her where she's at, and believing that healing is possible for her as well. So that's just beautiful to me. That is the end of this second podcast for Life and Hope. And we just want to thank our audience for joining us. We want to thank our supporters for making podcast episodes and the videos and the day-to-day programming take place. For you, our audience, I just want to encourage you. You can be a part of raising awareness. Lauren doesn't do this alone. I don't do this alone. Nobody on our team does this alone. We need you, our audience, to help spread the news that babies survive abortions and that there is hope where there is life. So please join us in this mission and advocate for survivors, for mothers, for families, to end the generational trauma of abortion. You can follow Lauren on her Instagram and Facebook handles that she talked about, and you can follow us on our handles. We are at the Abortion Survivors Network on Facebook, on Instagram. You can go on to abortionsurvivors.org to see those advocates, see more about Lauren's events. Subscribe to our newsletter. We talk a lot about survivors in the news, where survivors are speaking, the various programs we have going on. Incredible stories like babies who are being born from chemical abortions that fail, that we are just honored to be a part of supporting their moms. So the newsletter is just your greatest opportunity to come face to face with survivors like Lauren and hear more incredible stories that are grounded in the truth about babies surviving abortions. So share these good things with other people. Until next time, where there is life, there is hope.